A Roman war galley is torn apart by a ferocious Mediterranean squall. This was the brutal reality of nature that the Roman Empire faced daily. How could a civilization, armed with nothing but bronze and iron, possibly predict the fury of the skies to conquer the known world? Their survival depended on a mysterious system, a powerful fusion of sharp observation, deep superstition, and the very first sparks of science. By the end of this journey, you will understand the secret code the Romans used to read the weather. We will uncover how priests interpreted the flight of birds as divine messages and why farmers watched the moon for signs of rain. What do you think is the most surprising way ancient people tried to understand the world around them? Long before the first Roman farmer broke the soil of Italy, a Greek poet named Hesiod laid down a timeless guide. His poem, Works and Days, became the farmer's almanac of antiquity, a text so vital it was absorbed into the very fabric of Roman agricultural life. This was not just poetry, it was a practical survival manual written in verse, teaching how to read the sky and the seasons for a successful harvest. Hesiod instructed farmers on the precise timing for plowing and sowing by watching the stars. He paid special attention to the Pleiades, that cluster of 7 stars we often call the Seven Sisters. The poem tells us that the rising of the Pleiades at dawn marks the start of the harvest season, a time of intense labor under the summer sun, but their setting in the autumn sky was the urgent signal to begin plowing the fields for the next year's crop. This celestial calendar was memorized and recited, passed down from generation to generation. Roman agriculturists did not just copy this Greek wisdom, they adapted it. They observed their own Italian skies and soils, correlating the movements of constellations with the specific weather patterns of their homeland. A sudden chill when the Pleiades set might mean an early winter, advising a farmer to finish his plowing a week sooner. The poem even gave signs for daily weather, suggesting that a halo around the moon could foretell rain, a piece of folk forecasting that still holds a grain of truth today. Can you envision a world where your entire year, your family's food supply, depended on remembering the rhymes of an ancient poet and looking up at the night sky? This deep, intimate connection to the cosmos was the bedrock of Roman weather prediction, a system built on generations of observed patterns. But what happened when these celestial signs were not enough, when the Romans needed answers with more immediacy and certainty for their military campaigns and sea voyages? While farmers looked to the stars for the rhythm of the seasons, a Roman statesman was writing a manual for the daily grind. Pliny the Elder, a fierce defender of traditional values, believed the backbone of Rome was not in its legions, but in its farms. His book, De Agricultura, on agriculture, was a brutally practical guide for running a profitable estate, and it was filled with sharp, weather wisdom learned from a lifetime of dirt under the fingernails. This was not celestial poetry, it was hard-nosed business advice. Cato instructed his readers to watch the world around them with a hunter's focus. He noted that when cattle on a hillside all lie down together, or when sheep race about with an unusual frenzy, rain is almost certainly on the way. He paid close attention to the moon, observing that a clear, sharp horn crescent often meant fair weather, while a blurred, dull halo signaled an approaching storm. For a man like Cato, this was not mere superstition, it was empirical data, a direct line between an observable sign and a predictable outcome. This knowledge was the difference between profit and ruin. Knowing a heavy rain was coming could save a vineyard from being pruned at the wrong time, or an olive grove from being harvested when the fruit was too wet. It told a landowner when to send his grain to market before the roads turned to mud. The entire Roman economy rested on the success of these vast agricultural estates, and their success in turn rested on the owner's ability to read the subtle messages nature was constantly sending. Think of the weight of that responsibility, of watching the sheep in a distant field and making a critical financial decision based on their behavior. This was the very essence of Roman pragmatism, a system built on relentless observation. But what about when the stakes were even higher, when the fate of an entire army or the success of a massive naval invasion hung in the balance? While Cato wrote for the estate manager, the poet Virgil wrote for the soul of Rome itself. His Georgic stands as one of the great works of world literature, a sweeping 4-part poem that is at once a practical farming manual and a profound philosophical meditation. Virgil took the raw, earthy observations of men like Cato and transformed them into soaring verse, creating a guide that was as beautiful as it was useful. He instructs the farmer to watch for the sun's pale, sickly glow at sunrise, a sure sign of impending rain, and to note the restless, agitated movement of cattle, who seem to sense a coming storm long before it arrives. But Virgil does more than just list signs. He weaves them into a grand tapestry where scientific observation is inseparable from divine will. He speaks of Jupiter, the king of the gods, sending the rains that nourish the fields, and of the celestial bodies as active participants in the drama of the seasons. For the Roman, this was not a contradiction. A halo around the moon was both a physical phenomenon caused by ice crystals in the upper atmosphere and a direct message from the gods, a sign to be interpreted and obeyed. This fusion of the practical and the mystical defined the Roman worldview. To understand the weather was to understand the mood of the heavens, to align human activity with the rhythms of a living, breathing cosmos. Can you hear the difference between Cato's straightforward command and Virgil's lyrical warning? One tells you the cattle are restless, so bring the tools inside. The other describes the lowing of the herd, the uneasy sway of the ancient oak, and the sense of a world holding its breath before the sky opens. Both were essential, providing the same critical information but speaking to different parts of the Roman mind, the pragmatic and the spiritual. Yet even these poetic and practical guides had their limits for an empire that spanned the known world, an empire that needed to make official, state-sanctioned forecasts to protect its legions, its fleets, and its people. For the highest matters of state, the Romans turned from the fields to the sky, seeking answers in the wings of birds. This was the solemn art of augury, a formal state religion where specially trained priests, known as augurs, interpreted the divine will through the flight patterns, songs, and feeding behaviors of birds. They believed the gods used these creatures as living messengers, painting their intentions across the blue canvas of the heavens. The type of bird held immense significance. The eagle, sacred to Jupiter, was the ultimate imperial omen, its appearance and flight path scrutinized for decisions affecting the entire empire, like declaring war or appointing a new consul. For the everyday citizen or a local merchant, the woodpecker or the crow might provide a more common, though no less important sign. Direction was everything. A bird flying from the east, the direction of the rising sun, was considered favorable, a sign of divine approval. A bird coming from the west, however, carried an ill omen, a warning to postpone an election, delay a battle, or rethink a law. The augur would mark out a sacred space in the sky, a templum, and within that defined zone, he would read the patterns like a celestial language. Before a major military campaign, an augur would be consulted. If the birds ate the offered grain with vigor, flying in the correct auspicious direction, the general had the gods' blessing to march. If the birds refused to eat or flew away to the west, the entire army might stay in camp, its plans thwarted by a flock of finches. Can you picture the tension in that moment, the fate of thousands resting on the feeding habits of a few sacred chickens? This was not mere superstition, it was a core component of Roman statecraft, a system that provided divine sanction for human action and created a powerful sense of order in a chaotic world. But what happened when the message was unclear, when the skies were silent, and the Romans needed to look beyond the birds for a more immediate, tangible forecast? The sacred chickens could offer a simple yes or no, but for a detailed forecast, the Romans turned their eyes to the heavens themselves. They saw the moon not as a dead rock, but as a living, changing face in the sky, a direct influencer of the winds and the rains. A bright, sharp-edged crescent promised calm seas and fair weather, perfect for merchant ships' voyage, but a pale, blurred moon encircled by a faint, luminous ring was a certain warning of rain. This halo, caused by the moonlight refracting through ice crystals in high, thin clouds, signaled that moisture was gathering, that a storm system was approaching. A moon glowing with a dull, coppery red hue was read as an omen of powerful winds, a sign for any captain to reconsider setting sail. The sun, too, told its own story. A blood-red sun at dawn breaking through a thick haze often meant a day of strong, gusty winds, while a pale, watery sun at sunrise could indicate an approaching low-pressure system, bringing steady rain. This was a celestial language, a grammar written in light and color. The stars provided the long-term calendar, the heliacal rising of Arcturus, when the bright star first became visible in the eastern sky just before dawn, signaled the arrival of spring's violent, unpredictable gales. The setting of the Pleiades in the autumn told farmers to finish their plowing before the winter rains began. This entire cosmic clockwork was meticulously tracked by the pontifices, the highest priests of Rome. They were the official timekeepers of the Republic, responsible for maintaining the calendar and ensuring that religious festivals and agricultural cycles aligned perfectly with the celestial movements they observed. Imagine the power and responsibility these priests held, declaring the start of a new month or the date of a public holiday based on their observations of the stars. Their work wove the fabric of Roman time itself, synchronizing human society with the grand, predictable cycles of the cosmos. But what about the weather that defied these cycles, the sudden, violent storms that appeared from a seemingly clear sky? For those immediate, chaotic threats, the Romans developed an even more personal and urgent form of forecasting, one that listened not to the sky, but to the very aches in their own bodies. A sharp pain in an old soldier's knee was often the first sign of a coming storm. While priests watched the sky and poets wrote of celestial signs, the average Roman lived in a world surrounded by living, breathing barometers. They learned to trust the ancient wisdom written in the behavior of the creatures around them, a code of barks, croaks, and flight patterns that spoke of the weather with uncanny accuracy. Swallows and swifts darting just above the ground signaled that rain was near. The Romans did not know the scientific reason that low air pressure before a storm makes it harder for flying insects to gain altitude, but they correctly observed that when the birds flew low, their insect prey was also low and a downpour was likely on the way. A chorus of frogs croaking with unusual intensity and urgency from a nearby pond was another reliable omen of an approaching storm. This behavior is tied to the humid air that precedes rainfall, which keeps their skin moist and allows them to be more active and vocal. For a farmer planning to cut hay or a merchant loading a wagon, the sound of those frogs was a direct command to hurry or seek shelter. Even the simple sight of sheep frisking about playfully in a field was a welcome sign, predicting a stretch of fair, dry weather. This connection between animal agitation and stable high-pressure systems was a piece of data recorded not in a book, but in the daily rhythm of rural life. Can you hear the Roman countryside, a symphony of animal signals all whispering the forecast for the coming day? The cawing of crows, the path of an ant colony, the way cattle gathered on a hillside, each was a vital line in this living weather report. This knowledge was not just for convenience, it was essential for survival, dictating when to sail, when to sow, and when to simply stay home. The Romans had successfully decoded a complex natural language, but their greatest forecasting tool was not an animal or a star. It was a magnificent structure that stood in the very heart of the city itself. The very air they breathed carried a name and a purpose. For the Romans, the wind was not an invisible force, it was a divine messenger, a powerful spirit with a distinct personality and a clear intent. They personified the winds, giving each a name, a home, and a predictable character. From the north came Aquilo, the bringer of clear, cold air and fierce winter gales that could shatter a merchant sailing schedule. His breath was sharp and biting, sweeping down from the mountains. From the south blew Auster, a heavy, sullen wind, thick with humidity and the promise of torrential rain and fog, a curse for sailors and farmers alike. The gentle west wind, Favonius, was the herald of spring, his warm, mild breezes coaxing flowers to bloom and signaling the start of the safe sailing season after the storms of winter. Each direction held its own deity, its own set of known weather patterns that any seasoned captain or landowner could recite. This was a sophisticated mental map of the atmosphere, a way of turning the chaotic movement of air into a predictable cast of characters. The most famous monument to this understanding was not in Rome, but in Athens. The Tower of the Winds was an octagonal marble tower, a masterpiece of engineering and symbolism that the Romans knew well. On each of its 8 sides, a carved relief depicted one of the major wind deities in all his power. At its peak, a bronze weather vane in the shape of a sea triton pointed his staff toward the prevailing breeze, telling every citizen exactly which god was influencing their day. Below the tower, sundials marked the hours, and inside, a complex water clock tracked time even when the sun was hidden. This was a complete public time and weather station, built centuries before the Common Era. For a Roman admiral planning an invasion of Britain, the direction of Aquilo could mean the difference between a calm channel crossing and a fleet scattered by a storm. For a grain merchant shipping wheat from Alexandria to Ostia, predicting the arrival of Ostia was the difference between profit and a sunken cargo. The wind was a tangible, named factor in every major decision across the empire, a force to be respected, appeased, and understood. They had mapped the personalities of the sky itself, but this intricate knowledge of nature's signs was about to face its greatest challenge, a force of change that would sweep through the empire as powerfully as any storm. A Roman farmer did not need a barometer to feel a storm building. He simply had to look up. The sky itself was a vast, ever-changing map, and its cloud formations were the most immediate and legible script. They observed that high, wispy clouds like feathers brushed across the blue, often signaled a change in the weather within a day or two. We now call these cirrus clouds, and the Romans correctly linked their delicate appearance to the arrival of high-level moisture, the leading edge of a distant weather system. When these wispy threads began to thicken and lower, forming a milky veil over the sun, it was a sure sign that the weather was about to turn, that rain was moving ever closer. This was the crucial progression they watched for, the slow, deliberate march of a storm front written in the heavens. But the most urgent warning came from the nimbus cloud, a dark, heavy, and shapeless mass that blotted out the light. This was the rainbringer, the cloud that promised a deluge. Seeing that deep gray blanket rolling in from the sea would send a farmer rushing to secure his grain and a sailor racing for the safety of the harbor. The Romans were effectively categorizing clouds by their weather-bearing potential, creating a practical, observation-based system that predated our modern scientific classifications by nearly 2 millennia. Beyond the clouds, they decoded other luminous signs in the atmosphere. A rainbow arching across the sky after a storm was seen as a promise, a sign that the worst was over and fair weather would return. They also knew the meaning of the halo, that bright ring around the moon or sun caused by light bending through ice crystals. While a priest might see a divine message, a farmer knew it as a reliable indicator that rain would likely arrive within the next day. Perhaps the most poetic of these phenomena was what they called the sun drawing water. This was the appearance of pale, radiating bands of light, like sunbeams pouring down from behind a cloud. We know this today as crepuscular rays. The Romans interpreted this beautiful sight as the sun actively pulling moisture from the earth, a process they believed would inevitably lead to more rain. In every shimmer of light and every shift in the clouds, the Romans found a forecast, a continuous dialogue between the earth and the sky that guided their daily lives and secured their survival. A rumble of thunder was never just a noise in ancient Rome. It was a message from Jupiter himself, a divine pronouncement that demanded an official reply. While farmers watched the animals and sailors watched the waves, the Roman state entrusted its most critical weather forecasts to a special class of priests. These men were the bridge between the mortal realm and the volatile will of the gods, and their interpretations could alter the course of history. Among them, the haruspices held a particularly mysterious and vital role. Originating from the Etruscan civilization that predated Rome, these priests practiced a form of divination known as haruspicy, the art of reading the future in the internal organs of sacrificed animals. The state would present a sheep or a bull, and after the ritual slaughter, the haruspics would carefully examine the liver, the heart, and the lungs. Every mark, every spot, every unusual shape was a word in a divine language. A malformed liver could be a warning of a coming tempest that would wreck a fleet, while a healthy, robust heart might signal the gods' approval for a military campaign, promising fair winds and clear skies. But their expertise extended far beyond the altar. The haruspices were also the supreme interpreters of celestial fire. A lightning bolt tearing across the sky was not a random act of nature, it was Jupiter's most powerful and direct weapon. The very direction of the strike held meaning. A bolt coming from the left was considered auspicious, a sign of divine favor. A bolt from the right, however, was a terrifying omen of disaster. The location of the strike was meticulously recorded. Did it hit a temple, a public building, or a simple farmer's field? Each required a different, specific ritual response to appease the angry god and cleanse the profane site. The crack of thunder was similarly decoded. Was it a single, sharp report, or a long, rolling growl that seemed to shake the foundations of the world? The pattern, the duration, and the direction from which it came all contributed to the official forecast and the necessary religious actions. Can you feel the immense pressure on these priests? The fate of a consular election, the launch date of a legion, the entire political momentum of the republic could be frozen because a haruspices declared the weather signs unfavorable. This was not a matter of personal belief, it was a core function of the state, a system designed to maintain the pax deorum, the peace of the gods. By correctly interpreting these violent weather events and performing the proper rituals, the Romans believed they could literally negotiate with the atmosphere, turning divine wrath into benevolent support. This intricate dance of sacrifice and symbolism reveals a civilization desperately seeking order in a chaotic natural world, using every tool at its disposal to secure its survival and its destiny. The sheer weight of Roman weather wisdom found its ultimate expression in the work of one man. Pliny the Elder, a commander of the imperial fleet, devoted his life to a single monumental task. He was a collector, a compiler, and an encyclopedist of the entire known world, and his masterwork, Natural History, was a bookshelf in a single volume. Within its thousands of pages, he gathered every observable fact, every folk tradition, and every strange anecdote about weather prediction from every corner of the empire. This was not a poet's meditation or a priest's ritual, but a sprawling, messy, and utterly fascinating database of the natural world. Pliny recorded that certain types of seaweed become soft and swollen when submerged in fresh water, a sign he took as a precursor to heavy rain. He noted that sailors watched for dolphins swimming into harbors or playing near the shore, interpreting this unusual behavior as a reliable warning of an approaching gale. Even the lowly oyster and sea urchin were part of his forecast. He claimed that these creatures would cling more tightly to rocks before a storm, as if they could sense the coming turbulence in the water. His curiosity extended to the very earth itself. He wrote about different types of rocks and how they reacted to the air. Some stones, he observed, would develop a slick, damp surface or even appear to sweat as humidity rose before a storm. He described how certain minerals would change color or become duller when the weather was about to turn foul, as if the landscape itself was a vast barometer. Can you envision the scale of this project? Pliny was attempting to catalog the entire sensory language of the planet, from the actions of a dolphin to the feel of a wet rock. He blended sharp, accurate observations with tales that stretched the limits of belief, but his goal was always practical. For a Roman sea captain, knowing that his crew could predict a squall by watching the behavior of fish was invaluable knowledge, a direct line from nature to survival. Pliny's work represents the Roman mind at its most ambitious, trying to bring order to the chaos of nature by writing everything down. But this great compilation of knowledge was about to face a silent, invisible enemy that would scatter it for centuries. Yet even Pliny's vast collection of facts was not the final word. A different kind of mind was at work in Rome, one that questioned the very nature of these phenomena. The Stoic philosopher Seneca, in his profound work Natural Questions, approached the weather not as a list of signs, but as a series of puzzles to be solved through reason. He looked at a lightning strike and asked not what god was angry, but what physical process could tear the sky apart with such fire and sound. He proposed that lightning was caused by the violent collision of clouds, releasing a fiery blast much like the sparks that fly when two stones are struck together. This was a staggering leap toward a scientific understanding, an attempt to find a cause within nature itself. For earthquakes, he theorized that vast pockets of air became trapped underground, struggling to escape until their violent release shook the very foundations of the world. He even turned his rational gaze upon the rainbow, beautifully arguing it was not a divine message but a trick of the light, an image of the sun reflected in a cloud shaped like a hollow mirror. Seneca's great project was to separate the natural world from the world of superstition. He openly mocked those who saw every comet as an omen of a king's death or every thunderclap as a personal warning from Jupiter. To him, these were natural events, governed by laws that human reason could in time hope to understand. This was a radical strand of Roman thought, one that placed the power of prediction not in the whims of the gods, but in the consistent, knowable logic of the cosmos. Can you sense the shift in the air where a haruspices saw a divine pronouncement in a sheep's liver? Seneca saw only anatomy and natural cause. His work represents the quiet, persistent voice of Roman rationality, a voice that sought to demystify the world even while living in an empire saturated with ritual. But this brilliant spark of reason, like so much else, was about to be swallowed by the gathering clouds of history. While Seneca was building a framework of reason, another Greek voice was already whispering through the libraries of every educated Roman. That voice belonged to Aratus, a poet of the 3rd century before our era, whose 2 great works, the Phenomena and the Prognostica, were translated and revered for generations. This was not a philosophical argument, but a beautifully organized catalog of the sky. Aratus offered a complete system, a celestial handbook that mapped the constellations and then detailed the weather signs they heralded. His Prognostica took this further, providing a systematic list of forecasts based on everything from the mood of the dawn to the behavior of seabirds. It was this seamless blend of poetry and practicality that captivated the Roman mind. A Roman scholar could read Aratus's verses about the rising of the constellation Orion and learn that its appearance with a clear, bright glow promised fair weather, but if it rose shimmering and faint, fierce winds would soon follow. The poem gave signs for all occasions, noting that a halo around the moon meant rain, that a red sky at sunrise warned of storms, and that the sudden, noisy gathering of crows signaled an imminent change in the weather. This was not scattered folk wisdom, it was a unified theory of the sky, written in memorable hexameter verse. For a literate Roman landowner, Aratus became the essential reference, a bridge between the rustic observations of Cato and the cosmic grandeur of Virgil. His work was translated into Latin by no less a figure than Cicero in his youth, and later by others, embedding his Greek science deep into Roman culture. Can you see the scrolls in a wealthy merchant's villa, consulted before a ship was loaded with goods for a voyage across the Mediterranean? The merchant would cross-reference the poet's advice on the morning sky with the direction of the wind, feeling a sense of control granted by this organized knowledge. Aratus provided a common language of forecasting for the entire educated class, a shared text that allowed a statesman in Rome and a garrison commander in Gaul to look at the same sky and interpret its messages in the same way. This Hellenistic influence systematized Roman weather lore, turning a collection of local omens into a semi-scientific body of knowledge. It was a powerful fusion where the beauty of the poetry made the practical advice unforgettable, and the reliability of the signs lent truth to the beauty. The Roman world was now reading from the same celestial script, a code that promised to unveil the secrets of the next day's weather. A Roman legion's advance could be halted not by an enemy army, but by a single unfavorable cloud. For the military machine of Rome, weather prediction was not an academic exercise, it was a matter of life and death on an epic scale. Every general, from a provincial legate to a figure like Julius Caesar, understood that the skies were a strategic theater of war. Before committing his legions to a decisive battle, Caesar would always consult his team of specialists. These were not just common augurs, but military meteorologists, men trained to interpret everything from the flight of eagles to the subtle shifts in the wind. Their pronouncement of divine disapproval, based on the erratic behavior of a sacred bird, could force a delay, buying precious time for reinforcements to arrive or for the enemy's morale to weaken. The construction of massive siege works, those intricate networks of towers, ramps, and tunnels, was entirely dependent on the forecast. A sudden rainstorm could turn a carefully built earthen ramp into a useless, muddy landslide, wasting weeks of labor and dooming a siege. Campaigns themselves were timed around the Mediterranean climate. A general knew that sailing season effectively closed during the winter months, when the fierce breath of Aquilo made the seas impassable. To launch an invasion fleet too late in the year was to invite catastrophe. The consequences of ignoring these signs were etched into Roman history. During the First Punic War, a massive Roman fleet was caught in a devastating storm off the coast of Sicily. Hundreds of warships and thousands of men were lost to the waves in a single day, a catastrophic blow directly attributed to the commander's failure to heed the warning signs of an approaching tempest. Yet a correct forecast could bring legendary victory. Caesar himself, during his campaign in Gaul, famously used his knowledge of local weather patterns. He learned from captured scouts that a neighboring tribe planned to attack a nearby Roman garrison, relying on a raging storm to provide cover for their assault. Caesar, instead of hunkering down, forced his men to march through the terrible weather, arriving at the garrison in a blinding downpour. The attacking force, believing no army could possibly move in such conditions, was caught completely by surprise and decisively defeated. In that moment, Caesar did not just defeat an enemy army, he conquered the storm itself, turning a natural obstacle into a weapon. The fate of empires so often rested on this fragile art, on the ability of a few men to correctly read the mood of the heavens. Even the days on the Roman calendar carried a forecast. Woven into the very fabric of their year were the dies nefasti, the unlucky days when the veil between the human and divine worlds was considered thin and dangerous. On these dates, no public business could be conducted, no courts could meet, and no battles could be formally declared. The state literally shut down, and a primary reason was the weather. Many of these forbidden days fell during the heart of winter, a season of tempests and unpredictable gales, or in the turbulent months of early spring. The Roman state, through its calendar, was officially acknowledging that certain times of year were simply too meteorologically volatile for the gods to look favorably upon major human endeavors. This was a long-term, institutionalized form of weather prediction, a way of saying that the risk of storms was so high that the entire government would preemptively stand still. But the calendar was more than just a list of forbidden days. It was a complete almanac of the expected climate, synchronized with a cycle of religious festivals that guided the rhythm of life. The festival of the Perilia in late April was a purification rite for shepherds and their flocks, time for the arrival of reliably warmer weather when the threat of a late frost had passed. The Venalia rustica in August celebrated the previous year's wine harvest and marked the beginning of the new grape harvest, an event entirely dependent on the warm, dry weather of late summer. The entire agricultural year, from the sowing festival of the Sementivi to the harvest celebration of the Consualia, was a dance with the expected weather patterns. A Roman farmer did not just look at the sky each morning, he consulted his calendar. It told him that the time just after the winter solstice was for rest and repair, as the fields were too wet and cold for work. It warned him that the Ides of March were often accompanied by fierce winds, a time to secure his farmstead. This was a civilization that had codified generations of climatic observation into an official state-sanctioned timeline. Can you feel the profound sense of order this provided? The chaos of nature was tamed into a predictable, religious cadence, where every week had its purpose and every season its proper work. The calendar was their grand strategy against the unpredictability of the skies, a way to plan an empire in harmony with the turning of the year. But this intricate system, built on generations of tradition, was about to face a slow and silent transformation, one that would ultimately disconnect the human world from the celestial cycles it so deeply relied upon. The surface of the Tiber River was a sacred text for the priests of Rome. In the quiet of dawn, they would stand on its banks, their gaze fixed not on the water's flow, but on its intricate language of ripples and reflections. This was the ancient art of hydromancy, divination by water, a practice where every eddy and every shift in color held a message from the gods. The rituals were precise and solemn. A priest might pour sacred oil onto the surface of a still basin, interpreting the shapes the oil made as it spread. He would watch for bubbles rising from the depths, counting their number and noting their direction to predict the coming days. But the most critical observations were reserved for the Tiber itself, the lifeblood of the city. A sudden, inexplicable churning in its current, even on a calm day, was seen as a dire warning of political turmoil or an impending disaster. If the river ran unusually clear, it was an omen of favor from the river god, Tiberinus, but if its waters turned a thick, muddy red after a rain, it was interpreted as a sign of bloodshed to come, a portent of civil war or military defeat. The health of the city and the health of the river were one and the same. Can you see the connection they were making? A polluted or flooded Tiber was not just an environmental problem, it was a divine judgment, a crack in the very foundation of the state. This direct link between their primary water source and their collective fortune reveals a world where nature was never neutral, but always communicative, its every fluctuation a vital piece of a larger, sacred puzzle. The simple farmer did not need a scroll of Aratus to know the next day's weather. He only needed a rhyme from his grandfather. Across the sprawling empire, from the vineyards of Campania to the garrison towns of Britannia, weather wisdom was distilled into pithy, memorable proverbs that everyone could carry in their mind. These were not the formal pronouncements of the augurs, but the hard-won empirical observations of countless generations, polished into verse for easy recall. A sailor looking at a sunset would mutter, Rubens caelum noct nautis gaudium, a red sky at night is a sailor's delight. This was not just a pretty phrase, it was a reliable forecast. In the Mediterranean climate, a red sky at sunset often meant that the air to the west was clear and dry, allowing the sun's light to paint the clouds. Since weather systems typically move from west to east, this dry air was likely heading their way, promising a fair tomorrow. The inverse was just as true. A red sky in the morning, a shepherd's warning, signaled that the clear dry air had already passed, and a low-pressure system bringing moisture and rain was approaching from the west. Another common saying warned that when the new moon holds the old moon in its lap, rain will follow. This poetic image describes the phenomenon we call the old moon in the new moon's arms, when the dark portion of the moon is faintly illuminated by earthshine, light reflected from our own planet. The Romans observed that this faint glowing circle became most visible when the upper atmosphere was filled with a high, thin haze, a condition that often precedes a weather front and rain within a day or two. They were seeing the reflected light of our own world and correctly interpreting it as a sign of change. Can you hear the rhythm of these sayings, repeated in fields and on docksides? They noted that a ring around the moon meant rain was coming soon, a direct reference to the lunar halo caused by ice crystals. They watched the behavior of smoke from their hearths, knowing that if it rose straight and tall, fair weather would hold, but if it curled and sank back towards the ground, low pressure was settling in and rain was likely. Even the dew on the grass held a message. When the grass is dry at morning light, look for rain before the night. A dry morning indicated clear skies and dry air overhead, conditions that were often the calm before a storm system moved in. Each of these proverbs was a tiny, self-contained piece of science, a hypothesis tested by centuries of daily life. The accuracy of this folk wisdom is a testament to the power of relentless, collective observation. It was a democratic form of forecasting, accessible to every citizen, a living language of the sky that required no priest to interpret. This deep, ingrained knowledge was the true pulse of the Roman people, a rhythm as steady as the seasons themselves, until the very world they understood began to change around them. Yet for all their intricate knowledge, the skies sometimes kept their secrets. The Roman system of prediction was a powerful tool, but it was never a perfect shield against the chaos of nature. History is littered with the wreckage of its failures. The same Mediterranean that offered safe passage for trade could transform in an instant into a graveyard for entire fleets. One of the most devastating examples comes from the First Punic War. A massive Roman armada, confident after a recent victory, was caught off the coast of Sicily by a sudden, violent tempest. The augurs had presumably given their approval, the wind direction was favorable, yet the storm fell upon them with an unexpected fury. The result was catastrophic. Nearly 300 warships and over 100,000 men, soldiers and rowers alike, were swallowed by the waves in a single day. It was a blow so severe it nearly broke the Roman Republic's will to fight, a stark reminder that the gods, or simply nature, could overturn the best-laid plans of men. On land, the failures were just as brutal. A series of unexpected droughts could bring the might of Rome to its knees. When the spring rains failed to arrive, when the Tiber ran shallow and the fields cracked under a relentless sun, the carefully timed agricultural calendar became a cruel joke. Famine would inevitably follow, leading to social unrest, skyrocketing grain prices, and desperate citizens rioting in the streets. In such crises, the people looked for someone to blame, and their gaze often fell upon the state itself. If the pontifices, the keepers of the sacred calendar, had so misjudged the seasons, was it not a sign that the gods were displeased with Rome's leadership? A prolonged drought was not just a meteorological event, it was a political catastrophe that could threaten the stability of the entire government. The credibility of the priests and augurs was constantly on the line. When a consul was elected after a favorable reading of the birds, only to lead his army to a humiliating defeat in a rain-soaked battle, the public faith in the entire system wavered. There are accounts of generals, frustrated by the delays caused by inauspicious omens, deliberately ignoring the augurs. Sometimes this defiance led to disaster, proving the priests right. Other times, the general who marched despite the bad omens would win a glorious victory, returning to Rome a hero and leaving the state religion looking foolish and obstructive. This created a deep tension between pragmatic military command and rigid religious doctrine. The system was designed to provide certainty, but its inevitable failure sowed doubt and political intrigue, forcing the Romans to confront the uncomfortable truth that their dialogue with the divine was often a conversation with the unpredictable. A blueprint for survival was etched into the very stones of Rome. While priests read the skies and farmers watched the animals, the empire's greatest engineers were designing structures that could negotiate with the climate itself. The architect Vitruvius, in his 10-volume work De Architectura, laid down principles that transformed weather wisdom into physical form. He argued that a builder's first and most critical task was not to draw plans, but to read the land and the sky. Before a single foundation was dug, the architect had to understand the prevailing winds. Vitruvius provided detailed charts on the 8 major wind directions, explaining that a city street should be laid out to block the cold, unhealthy winds while channeling the gentle, beneficial breezes. A town facing the full fury of the north wind would be a sickly place, but one oriented to catch the warm west wind would enjoy health and vitality. This was urban planning as preventative medicine, a direct response to the belief that different winds carried different miasmas or bad airs that could cause disease. He advised that baths and bakeries which required steady heat should be placed on the south side of a building to capture the maximum sunlight, while granaries should face north to stay cool and dry, protecting the precious grain from rot and insects. Can you see the intelligence in this design? A building that actively worked with the seasons rather than just resisting them. Vitruvius gave specific instructions for private homes. A dining room for winter use, he wrote, should face the setting sun in the west to capture the last of the day's warmth. Bedrooms and libraries, however, should face the east, welcoming the gentle morning light but avoiding the intense heat of the afternoon. He even considered the angle of the sun throughout the year, designing eaves that were calculated to block the high summer sun while allowing the lower winter sun to penetrate deep into the rooms, providing natural heat. This was solar engineering 17 centuries before the term was invented. His observations extended to materials, noting that certain types of stone would sweat and crumble in damp, salty air blowing from the south, making them a poor choice for coastal villas. He recommended pine wood for structures in the north because it resisted the damp chill better than oak. Every choice, from the orientation of a city to the type of timber in a roof, was a calculated response to the Roman climate. This was meteorology made solid, a living architecture that breathed with the wind and basked in the sun, proving that the Romans did not just predict the weather, they built a world in conversation with it. The fall of Rome did not shatter its weather wisdom. As the empire's political structures crumbled, its most vital knowledge found sanctuary behind the thick, silent walls of monasteries. Here in dimly lit scriptoria, Benedictine monks became the unsung guardians of the classical world. With meticulous care, they dipped their quills into ink and began the monumental task of preservation. They copied the works of Pliny and the verses of Virgil, transcribing not just poetry, but a complete system for understanding the natural world. These handwritten codices, often adorned with beautiful illuminations, became the sole vessels carrying Roman meteorological science across the dark and turbulent sea of the early Middle Ages. A medieval abbot planning the monastery's harvest would consult the same celestial signs that a Roman farmer once did, his agricultural year guided by a calendar inherited from a fallen empire. The monastic chronicles themselves began to note unusual weather events, great freezes, destructive storms, and prolonged droughts, creating a new, continuous record that built directly upon the Roman tradition of observation. Can you picture the chain of knowledge stretching unbroken from a Roman estate to a medieval cloister, all held together by the patient hands of scribes? This was not a static preservation, but a vital transmission. The proverbs of the Roman countryside were absorbed into the daily speech of European peasants. The red sky at night, a sailor's delight, was now a warning muttered by English fishermen in the North Sea. The halo around the moon, promising rain, was watched for by Frankish farmers plowing fields that had once been Roman provinces. The very winds still bore their Latin names in many regions, their characters and tendencies remembered. The practical weather lore of Cato and the celestial cycles of Aratus became the foundational text for a new, emerging Europe. This ancient knowledge formed the bedrock upon which all later European weather prediction would be built, a direct bridge of understanding that connected the classical mind to the modern world, ensuring that the sky would never become silent again. A Roman farmer watching swallows skim the ground was unknowingly reading a barometer. His belief that their low flight meant rain was not mere superstition, but a precise observation of a biological chain reaction. Modern science reveals that low air pressure, which often precedes a storm, makes it harder for flying insects to gain altitude. The swallows are simply following their prey, and the farmer, by watching the birds, was accurately detecting that drop in atmospheric pressure. His method was empirical, tested over generations, and we now understand the physics behind his forecast. That halo around the moon, which the Romans saw as a divine ring, is caused by the refraction of moonlight through millions of ice crystals suspended in high, thin cirrostratus clouds. These very clouds are often the leading edge of a warm front, a system that typically brings rain within the next day or two. The Roman interpretation was poetically different, but their practical conclusion was scientifically sound. Even the way smoke behaves, a common sign in their proverbs, has a clear physical explanation. Smoke that curls and sinks instead of rising straight up indicates a stable atmosphere with high pressure, where the air is denser and sinks, trapping the smoke. But when low pressure moves in, the air becomes less dense and rises, allowing the smoke to climb in a clean, vertical column, signaling fair weather. The Romans saw the effect, and we now know the cause. Their entire system was a brilliant, long-term experiment in pattern recognition. They may have attributed the signals to the moods of the gods, but the patterns they documented were real, measurable phenomena. They were decoding the symptoms of the atmosphere's health long before we had the instruments to take its temperature. This validation by modern meteorology is a powerful testament to the power of human observation. It proves that our ancestors were not just guessing. They were building a reliable, functional science with their own eyes and ears, a science that kept their world running in harmony with the skies. The farmer Lucius stirs before dawn, his first glance reserved for the eastern horizon. A pale, watery sun struggles through a thick haze, its light weak and diluted. He murmurs the old proverb under his breath, a red sky at morning, a shepherd's warning. The day will not stay dry. As he walks to the well, he watches the swifts. Instead of swooping high above the fields, they dart and weave just above the grass, skimming the earth for their insect prey. This confirms it. The air is heavy and low, pressing down on the world. A storm is gathering its breath. His wife, drawing water, notes the smoke from their hearth. It does not rise in a clean column, but curls back toward the ground, sluggish and trapped, another silent testament to the sinking air. Every chore is now a race against the coming rain. He sends his son to secure the haystacks with extra ropes and decides to postpone grinding the grain at the mill, knowing the path will soon be a river of mud. The sheep are unusually restless, bleating and bunching together in the far field, their own animal intuition sensing the shift in pressure. By midday, the wind begins to change. The gentle west wind, Favonius, that had blown for days, falters and then stills. An uneasy calm descends, and from the south a new breath arrives, the sullen, humid Auster. Lucius feels its damp touch on his skin and smells the distant rain on its breath. He looks up at the sky, where the high, wispy clouds of the morning have now thickened into a milky gray sheet, veiling the sun completely. The world has grown quiet, the birds have fallen silent, and the only sound is the leaves of the olive trees showing the pale undersides of their leaves. He makes his final decision, leading the oxen back to the safety of their stable. As the first heavy drops begin to fall, drumming on the clay tile roof, Lucius sits in the doorway, watching the storm fulfill every prediction written in the sky, the animals, and the very air itself. His entire day, a continuous and unconscious act of forecasting, has once again negotiated a truce with the unpredictable will of the heavens. A sundial's shadow was more than just a clock for the Romans. Carved from stone and strategically placed in a forum or a wealthy patron's courtyard, it tracked the sun's path with silent precision. Its moving shadow did not just mark the hours, it charted the entire year. By observing the length and angle of the shadow at noon, a knowledgeable Roman could discern the summer and winter solstices, the key turning points of the seasons that governed all long-term weather planning. This was the empire's master calendar, a public instrument that synchronized human activity with the solar cycle. On the roof of a seaside villa, a different kind of tool spun in the breeze. A bronze weather vane, often fashioned in the shape of a sea god like Triton, would point his staff to indicate the prevailing wind. This was not merely decorative. For the villa's owner, a merchant who shipped goods across the Mediterranean, knowing that Aquilo was blowing from the north meant his ships in Ostia might be delayed by rough seas. It was an immediate personal forecast, a direct line to the mood of the wind gods that influenced daily decisions. Indoors, for the hours when the sun was hidden, a water clock or clepsydra provided a steady mechanical measure of time. This complex device used the regulated flow of water from one container to another to mark the passing hours. While not a weather predictor itself, it allowed priests to record the precise timing of celestial events, like the duration of an eclipse or the exact moment a star rose, data crucial for maintaining their astronomical calendars. But the most comprehensive tool of all was not made of bronze or stone, but of painted wood or parchment. The illustrated fasti calendars were masterpieces of information design. These were not simple grids of days, but elaborate, beautifully decorated charts that mapped the entire year. They marked the dies nefasti, the unlucky days, but more importantly, they illustrated the seasonal positions of constellations and the festivals tied to them. A farmer could look at his fasti and see that the festival of the Venalia rustica was approaching, which meant it was time to prepare the wine presses, as the late summer weather was typically hot and dry, perfect for the harvest. These calendars synthesized celestial cycles, religious observance, and expected weather into a single, usable guide for managing an estate or a city. Can you see the interconnected system these tools created? The sundial tracked the sun, the vane read the wind, the water clock kept time after dark, and the fasti calendar brought it all together into a practical plan for the weeks and months ahead. This was the Roman arsenal for imposing order on the climate, a blend of elegant engineering and meticulous record-keeping that turned the chaotic rhythms of nature into a predictable, manageable rhythm of life. A thunderclap was the voice of Jupiter, the king of gods, shaking the heavens from his celestial throne. For the Romans, weather was never an impersonal force of nature, but the direct expression of divine will, a drama played out by powerful, temperamental deities who demanded respect. At the pinnacle of this divine hierarchy stood Jupiter Optimus Maximus, the best and greatest, who wielded the lightning bolt as his ultimate weapon. His temple on Rome's Capitoline Hill was the spiritual center of the empire, where state priests performed elaborate sacrifices to win his favor. A lightning strike was not a random event, it was a profound communication. A bolt scorching the earth on the left side was a sign of approval, but one striking from the right was a terrifying omen of disaster, requiring immediate rituals of purification to cleanse the polluted site. The Romans believed they could literally negotiate with the sky, offering a white ox to Jupiter in the hope of averting a hailstorm that could devastate the vineyards. Beneath the sky, the realm of the seas and all freshwater belonged to Neptune. This powerful god could calm the waves for a merchant fleet or summon a tsunami to destroy an enemy armada. Before any major naval expedition, the Roman admiral would lead a ceremony at the god's altar, sacrificing a bull and pouring wine into the surf as a libation, pleading for safe passage and favorable currents. But Neptune's power extended beyond the salt water. His influence was felt in the earthquakes that shook the land and in the life-giving springs that fed the aqueducts. A sudden drought was a sign of Neptune's displeasure, a warning that the city had neglected its duties to the god of all waters. And then there were the winds, personified and commanded by Aeolus, the keeper of the storms. Locked away in a vast cave, Aeolus held the unruly winds captive, releasing them at his own discretion or at the plea of a higher god. A Roman sailor did not simply fear a storm, he feared the specific breath of Auster, the oppressive south wind, or the sudden fury of Eurus, the unpredictable east wind. To appease Aeolus and secure a gentle west wind for their journey, sailors would throw coins into the sea as an offering or whisper prayers for the favor of Favonius. This entire mythological framework created a world that was alive with purpose and intent. A successful harvest was not just good luck, it was proof that the sacrifices to Jupiter had been accepted. A ship's safe return was evidence that Neptune had been properly honored. This deep interconnection between religion and meteorology provided a sense of order and agency in a frighteningly unpredictable world. It was a system of cause and effect where humanity had a role to play, where the right prayer at the right time could literally change the weather. The Roman approach to weather was a masterpiece of synthesis. They never relied on a single method, but wove together threads of hard-nosed observation, inherited folk wisdom, and profound religious faith into a resilient tapestry of understanding. This multifaceted system allowed them to navigate the world for centuries, turning the terrifying chaos of nature into a conversation they could participate in. A farmer did not have to choose between the scientific reason of Seneca and the sacred rituals of the augur. He could use both, letting the flight of a bird confirm the ache in his own bones. Their forecasts were not always correct by our modern standards, but they were always actionable, providing a framework for decision-making that reduced uncertainty and fostered a sense of control. This intricate dance with the atmosphere was a key ingredient in their endurance, enabling them to plant their crops, sail their ships, and build their empire in rhythm with the world they believed was listening. So the next time you glance at the sky and feel a change in the air, you are participating in that ancient human tradition. Look up with the eyes of a Roman and see if you can read the stories written in the clouds. What old weather sayings have been passed down in your own family or culture? Share them in the comments below, and let's continue this ancient conversation together.